Hey folks, it's Ardwulf. Welcome. We're going to do not exactly an unboxing today, but we're going to do a look at a new RPG product, Chivalry and Sorcery 5th edition. Now, I have owned at one point or another all the editions of Chivalry and Sorcery, but I don't have very many of them anymore. What I do have is this, which is called Chivalry and Sorcery Rebirth, and this is sort of a little folio pack of 3 books that they did some years ago. And I want to say that these are from Maple Leaf Games Studios, who had the rights to this at the time. The first edition of Chivalry and Sorcery came out in 1977 from Fantasy Games Unlimited, and it was probably, to my knowledge, the very first RPG of any kind that tried to take a rules-heavy, very mechanical approach to role-playing games. FGU released a second edition sometime around 1980. I didn't have the exact date on that. And then there was a third edition, which suffered from many of the same issues as the Rebirth edition, but more so. Rebirth is, for the most part, if you try to look at these little coats of arms, for example, you're going to see that the text under them is very difficult to read. And Rebirth had some typesetting issues too, but it is basically in a readable visual format. Now, there's 3 books here. The first of which is the core rules, which is all the main games, and then there's a volume 2, which is Magic and Miracles, which is the Magic system, and then a Game Master's Companion. And I think you could see how muddy the trade dress looks here, even where the art is not really that bad. But up to now, Rebirth was essentially the only game in town if you wanted like an up-to-date edition of Chivalry and Sorcery. Now, they did also produce this thing. I have it in an envelope. I'm not going to bust it out. This is called CNS Lite. This came out after Rebirth, and it is basically a very streamlined version of Chivalry and Sorcery. It comes with 2 booklets and another sort of floppy screen. The second booklet, though, is called The Dragon Reaches of Marrakush, which is sort of the official FGU fantasy setting. Not FGU, but Chivalry and Sorcery. And then there's another product which I don't own called CNS Essence, which is an even more distilled version of Chivalry and Sorcery. But just released, kickstarted, I think last year, is this Chivalry and Sorcery 5th edition, which I have just received. So we are going to bust this open and give it a closer look. And I, for once, didn't remember to start the shrink wrap opening process off camera. And this did come in shrink wrap. Now, you can get this in PDF in a number of places, including DriveThruRPG. The physical volume right now, thanks pandemic, is only available through, at least in the U.S., Indie Press Revolution. That's where I got this for. I have not ordered anything from them in a very long time. This arrived. The corners are a little dinged up, but I strongly suspect that happened before Indie Press Revolution got a hold of it because it was packed extremely well. So what we have here is a big hardcover book of something like 600 pages. And I'm happy to say just about 600 pages. And I'm happy to say that typesetting is not a problem that we have with this game because it's a beautifully put together volume, regardless of whether you warm to the system or not. So let's give it a flip through. This is literally, obviously, the first time I've opened it. We have the current publisher is Brittannia Game Designs, which I think is actually located in New England. I could be wrong about that. I might be misremembering that. Dedicated to Ed Zimbalist and Wolf Backhouse, who were the original designers of Chivalry and Sorcery, both of which are no longer with us at this point. Does it actually give us an address for Brittannia Game Designs? I don't see that. Well, in any case, the glorious table of contents, which is pretty awesome. Now, there's a very thorough table of contents in here, you'll see, which is like 6 pages, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages of table of contents. This is meant to be complete in one volume. The introduction here, I've looked at the PDF already because I got the PDF plus print bundle. So I've looked at the PDF, but not at the physical book. Paper quality is sort of semi-gloss, a little bit thin, but not super thin. I mean, it's a 600-page book. You're not going to get super thick paper out of it. It talks about how CNS is basically a simple game. I feel like that's a little bit disingenuous since Yeah, the basic mechanic is not particularly complicated, but boy, there's a lot of extra stuff on top of that base mechanic in this book. The base mechanic is a percentile system, and along with the percentile die roll, you roll an extra d10 of a different color, which is called the crit die, which determines the relative success or failure of the result, whether it's a success or a failure. Which is nothing really wrong with that mechanic at all. The art in here it's not really lavishly illustrated. You're going to see that as we leaf through it. We have some reasonably nice art where it appears, but there's not a ton of art in the book. We have example play in quite a small font here. The regular font for the main text of the game is not particularly small, and I rather like it as somebody with eye problems now. Chivalry and Sorcery is a game I've wanted to play for a long time, but have never managed to play despite owning every edition of the game, other than, I guess, Chivalry and Sorcery Essence. So one of the other things that CNS has always kind of concentrated on is kind of this authentic, nominally anyway, authentic presentation of the historical Middle Ages in Western Europe. Now, that too is a little bit of a misnomer. The original designers, I believe, were in the Society for Creative Anachronism. And the medieval society that is presented in Chivalry and Sorcery is a somewhat idealized, not completely, with all the warts and disease and stuff buffed out of it, but it's a bit idealized vision of chivalry specifically. So in here is where we get that description of how medieval society in Western Europe in the Middle Ages works, as presented in the game, and it's a very nice presentation. Somewhat new to this edition, I don't remember this being in any particular core version of the original game. We have some sections on Judaism and Islam. These are obviously important, and it gives you a little bit of extra perspective on the Middle Ages that wasn't necessarily present in older editions of the game. I can't vouch for the veracity of any of this information on Judaism or Islam, but it is in here, and it's good that it's in here. So still into this, we're going to see the character creation system here in a few minutes, and it also talks actually about Sub-Saharan Africa. Sub-Saharan African characters, different knightly orders. So there's a lot of really nice detail in here. And it's good to see that at least, the core concept of the game is to replicate an idea of feudal Europe. But it's nice to see that you're given information on things that don't exactly fit into that, because it's important that you have that too, of things that don't exactly fit into the core culture. Core game mechanics. So this skillscape system is something that was introduced with Chivalry and Sorcery 3rd edition, which if you feel like the typesetting in the Rebirth set is bad, boy, you should have seen the 3rd edition. That's one reason why I got rid of it. Despite that, it's basically the same game as 3rd edition. First and second editions are somewhat different. First edition was a perfect bound book, and second edition was a boxed set. Very typical of the FGU boxed sets in that day, with 3 staple-bound books inside. If anybody ever tells you that Palladium Books was the first company to do a perfect bound RPG book, they are not correct. The first one that I am aware of was, in fact, Chivalry and Sorcery 1st edition. Very hard to find that. I wish I wouldn't have gotten rid of it just for the sake of historical interest. But it was not super playable out of that box. I think the first really playable edition of it, now people will disagree with this, of course, and when I say the first really playable, I don't mean that necessarily first edition was flatly unplayable. That's obviously not the case. But the second edition cleaned a lot up, and the 3rd edition cleaned a lot more up, and Rebirth cleaned a lot more up, and this is definitely a new version of that. So basic mechanics, we basically talked about it to the extent. You've got a lot of examples of play here, which is also nice. We also have certain mechanics have like a quick play method and a detailed play method, which is also nice. If you're not looking for detailed mechanics, though, then I'm not sure why you would be interested in Chivalry and Sorcery, to be honest, because part of what Chivalry and Sorcery is all about is detailed mechanics, which I personally like, but not everybody does, and that's fine. We have experience. So there's actually a level system in Chivalry and Sorcery, and it's a very interesting and very obvious level system that I think a couple other games have done. Your level is based not on the amount of experience that you have just gathered. It's based on the amount that you have spent. So you get experience, and then you spend the experience, and your level reflects the amount that you've spent. So you can have a bunch of experience piled up, and only be, say, level 4, where if you spend all your experience, you might be level 6, for example. It is a skill-based system. You have a number of skill categories, and we'll see some of that. Here's the experience system right here. And it looks like it's a straight 5,000 per level for experience, and I think that's pretty much as it existed in previous editions as well. You have influence, which is something that you can use to conduct social mechanics. There's a social mechanic in this game, and actually it might be the first, Chivalry and Sorcery might have been the first game to include a mechanic for social interaction. Or here we're talking about persuasion rolls. So whether we think it's a good idea or not to put all this mechanical stuff before character creation is a matter that you could debate. I personally don't have an issue with it. I don't really have an issue with it. So here's character creation, and we see that we have this 19-step character creation process. And that might make you think that it's a fairly complicated and detailed system. It is, if anything, misrepresenting it on the low side. So it is, in fact, a very complicated character creation system. So the first thing you do is there are different character creation options here, right? There is a points-based system, and there's a random system, and there's something called the Lionheart system, which it doesn't really... I don't know where... Oh, okay, here we go. So everything's rolled randomly. Everything's rolled randomly is basically what that means. So you actually generate a horoscope is the first step. You generate some birth omens. You might be well aspected, neutrally aspected, or poorly aspected. Most characters will be neutrally aspected. If you are either well or poorly aspected, then you have an extra propensity towards magic. But if you're poorly aspected, you also get some problems along with that too. Now we have a big section on being female. I feel like they're trying to be even-handed with this, but this isn't something that I am particularly inclined to favor in a fantasy game these days. I don't know that... A lot of this is about the social position of women in medieval society, and it's not wrong, but I don't... Are there stat modifiers for female characters? I think there were, but I'm not sure there are anymore. In fact, I don't think there are anymore. In which case, I guess I'm okay with it. Again, it's a fantasy game, right? To some extent, you want verisimilitude. I'll use that term instead of realism in even a fantasy game, but also, you want people to be able to play it and enjoy it too. So we have some different races here. We have, that's not here, but there are different races. So here we have what looks like social class generation, and this is actually your father's social class. And we have a large variety of tables to determine that, including special ones just for Jews. And we have 3 different periods, too. We have like an early feudal, a high chivalric, and a late or waning feudal period, which correspond to actual dates. I forget what those dates are, but it's in an interesting nuance that wasn't really part of previous editions that I can recall. We're still in the Father's Vocation tables here, by the way. So as you can see, there's a lot of this. And then these will give you starting skills, right? This is a terrible example, actually. Father was a thug for hire. basic chivalric training is like basic training at arms, not training as a knight necessarily. We also have a chance to get fiefs, actually, which is a whole section of the book, is on the granting and management of fiefs, which we'll hopefully get to step through. You get to generate your sibling rank, which is, whether you're the first son, second son, third daughter, whatever, within the family. You can be an unrecognized bastard, a recognized bastard, or legitimate. You have determined the status of your parents. So yeah, as you can see, even that 19-point outline up at the front does not necessarily reflect how detailed this character creation system is. Here you have a table of curses. Curses. Here's a table for allergies. You can have allergies. Here's a table of special abilities and talents that you could potentially have. Here are the talent descriptions. There's deficiencies, which you might also randomly generate, and there's descriptions of those. Personal attributes. So this is the stats, the characteristics of the game. There are physical, intellectual, communal, and derived. And the derived ones are just, they sound like they're derived from other abilities. Strength, constitution, and dexterity for physical, intellect, wisdom, and discipline for intellectual. Communal includes bardic voice, appearance, and spirit, and then derived is agility, ferocity, and charisma, which I think is derived from bardic voice and appearance, I think. And of course, you can roll these randomly with the Lionheart method, which is a cute way to put it, actually. Character size. This will help you determine your character's size. So if you're the kind of player that likes this kind of thing, and I kind of do, although there's certainly something to be said for something that's a little less robust, then this is definitely a game that you might want to take a look at. Here is body recovery rates determined by your constitution. You have to determine the number of fatigue points you have, which, as I recall, you spend fatigue points to take actions in combat. You determine lifting and carrying capacity. That's very old school. Your movement rates, which give you action points, which is another currency that you use to do things in combat. Personalizing traits, including foibles and quirks, hair features, and then names. Do we get a list of sample names? It looks like we don't. I'm a little surprised by that. Because literally everything else is here, right? It's not a life path character creation system as such, but it is definitely, it gives you a lot of information about the character's history when you exit this character creation process. Now there are also vocations. Now you might think, oh, these are just classes, and they sort of are, but not really. These basically are skill bundles that you start, determine what your starting skills are. You have, first category of them is fighters. You have Servians and liveried horsemen or other mounted warriors, guards, retainers, and warriors, foresters, warriors of the wild lands, knights, the chivalric warriors, knights in holy fighting orders, and these all have primary skills and secondary skills that they will grant you. And then those skills become easier to learn. Thievish vocations. I'm not sure that I've ever seen the word thievish outside of chivalry and sorcery, but you have burglars, beggars, cut purses, assassins, physician. Now, why does it say assassins? Physician vocation. That bothers me. Adventurers. So you could kind of create... So what the adventurer is basically a design your own vocation type thing. Heralds. Now, there's magical vocations in here, too. Those appear later in the book. And then we talk about mages. So we have, well, actually, not that much later in the book, but they are dealt with later in the book as well. So we have conjurers, enchanters, hex masters, necromancers, power word mages, thaumaturges, elementalists, of which you can be 4 different types. You have priests. Well, these are priest... Okay, so there's a category, priest mages, starting with druids. There's a whole section on druids. There are shamans. There are witches, friars, monastics, ordained clergy. Now we're getting into the clergy. And then you have acts of faith, which are kind of like miracles. that you like standard miracles that are available to you based on your vocation. Prayers. This is kind of like it just drops you into this massive skill list. I'm not sure why, because you'll see that there's like 2 full pages of skills. This is the skill list, right? And then we get a big section on descriptions of skills. Why didn't they put ye old skills list, which is cute, on this page, which is the first one? I'm not going to go through the skill descriptions, but they are quite detailed, as you would by this point not be surprised to learn. There's a whole section on combat skills. We're not going through all the individual. Here's lore skills, which are their own sort of category of skills that operate a little bit differently. Materia medicina. There's a use of a certain amount of pseudo-Latin in this game, which has always bothered me as somebody that actually learned Latin and who has seen it employed very effectively in other RPGs, specifically in Ars Magica. We do have a very thin, and not quite long enough to be honest about it, cloth bookmark here, which is a nice feature. Perception skills, keeping going. Materia Magica skills deals with lore concerning a wide range of magical subjects. Modes of magic. So I'm going to try not to mischaracterize this. So in Chivalry and Sorcery, if you are a spellcaster, you have both a mode of magic, which is sort of the type of magic user you are, and one or more magical methods, which are the kinds of magic that you use. And based on what your magic using vocation is, that's what will determine that. The magic in Chivalry and Sorcery, I think, was inspired by the work of Bonewitz, who was, in my opinion, a bonehead. So you're going to get a lot of that. It's a very, very fussy magic system. And in fact, it was originally designed with making it difficult to play a mage on purpose in mind, because they didn't want people to everybody to be a mage. That was the way that was approached. So now we have the marketplace, which is going to be a huge equipment list. It is quite a large equipment list, which includes, it's one of the most thorough equipment lists, like a core book equipment lists that I have seen. And there's a lot of like mundane stuff in here, like different kinds of beer, mead, and cider, for example. I think it's kind of cool that that's there, rather than creating big equipment lists of high-powered magical items that give you special powers and stuff. There's magical materials like gemstones and stuff. Here's a big list of herbs and flowers, quite a big list. Magical woods. Now you can turn these materials into magical things. So that's why you get this huge list of magical characteristics. Armament, so now we're into weapons and stuff, of which you can see there's quite a large selection. I don't see a huge table of polearms, though, which surprises me just a little bit. Maybe I haven't seen it yet. Now here we're into armor. So different kinds of armor. As you can see, there's quite a lot of different armor. There are also different damage types: slash, crush, pierce, missile, and energy. How is missile different from either crush or pierce? If it's sling stone, it should be crush, and if it's a arrow, it should be pierce. So I'm not sure what the difference is. So you would think. Here's shields. There's a big section on this. Movement and time. There's a whole section on downtime, which is something that I like to see, which you'll see a little bit more of in the next unboxing of RPG thing from me, actually. So here's the combat system. All right. So we have starts on page 268. And runs through page 287. So it's just under 20 pages of combat rules, which is surprisingly lean, considering the amount of combat rules you saw in, for example, D&D 3rd Edition, which had quite a beefy combat chapter, and overall is not as detailed of a game. So here we have magic. Now we have like this whole magic theory thing with the different magical laws and stuff like this. If you are, I might as well mention this since I've already mentioned the game. If you are a fan of playing Wizards and you want a game that focuses on that, then I highly recommend Ars Magica, which is from Atlas Games currently. It's had several publishers in the past. Ars Magica or Ars Magica is how we always said it, but it's Magica if you say it in Latin. Great game that was our primary game for a long time. So we have here lists of spells, quite a lot of them. This is in super tiny print, by the way. Not sure how well you're seeing that. We have a huge section of spells organized by magical method, I believe. It's a little hard to keep that straight. Still in spells, still in spells, still in spells. Yes, okay, this is something different. So here we're talking about religion, okay? And there's kind of, you have a faith. Faith is kind of what this whole thing is called. And you have a personal faith factor, and then an SPF, what's SPF? I forget. Which is maybe your current, which determines how faithful you are right now. Clerical tapping of the congregation's belief pool. So this is how you cast clerical magic. It's really quite cool. Again, you better know what you're getting into here with this sort of very complicated. Here's actions or deeds that increase your faith rating. Here's a section on Judaism here with a Jewish timeline and some things about Judaism and the different ethnic divisions within Judaism. We're going to get a relations with non-Jews. Quite a large section on this, actually. Jewish mysticism. Here's Islam in the Middle Ages by Omnia al-Dasuki. So it looks like they got actual people that know what they're talking about to do this at a glance. Judaism was written by Michael Shamail. Okay. But we also get a big section on Islam as well, including different mechanics for those, since we're treating Christianity as what's de facto Christianity anyway with mechanics, we get those for Judaism and Islam as well, which is nice. And again, I can't vouch for the veracity of any of this. I'm going to have to rely on somebody else to tell me that. Saints and demigods, holy ground, summoning demons, being a game master. So now we're into there wasn't in the Rebirth edition some really good guidelines on how to build fantasy kingdoms, and I hope that has been retained in here as well. But this is the general game master section. So here's the section on the campaign world mapping. It's good that they discussed that. I feel like the basis of this kind of thing. Here's just a whole bunch more on medieval society. Social positions and modes of address. Inheritance and succession. Here's a bunch of different income charts for different professions, which is always nice to have. It gives you an idea, even if you don't use it per se, you can look at it to see, okay, so here's like an average living wage. Here's all here's the fief table that tells you what you get if you have this level of fief. Same with this. And here's an example. The fief of William Fitzansculf. Okay. NPCs. So here's some, this is always nice to see too, is like some standard NPC templates. It's good to see, good to have that kind of thing. This is the kind of game system too that like those entities in the game that aren't player characters are treated basically the same as player characters, which makes sense, but is also generally makes the game more difficult to run. So here we have some different races and stuff, it looks like. Am I skipping over too fast? I might be. Orcs, goblins, and hobgoblins, or are we in? Nope, these are actual races. Nice elf picture. Here's dwarves, elves, orcs and goblins, trolls, weird creatures, vampires. It's hard to tell whether this is... Okay, so here's actual bestiary at this point. So you can... Actually, and I think there's an adventure where you do some vampires. So here we're in the bestiary, and we've got a big table that's in landscape format, which I aggressively dislike when it is mixed with parts of the book in portrait format as well. I certainly empathize with maybe the desire to do it that way, but I'm not a fan. There's a lot of different fairies and elementals in here, and standard mythological creatures like unicorns and pegasi and stuff like that. Giants, enchanted creatures like basilisks and harpies and stuff like that. Gnomes are a type of elemental in this game. Different types of dragons, demons, a whole section on demons, which get their own special typeface. This is a very sort of medieval Christian outlook portrait of demons, and not particularly like the treatment of demons in D&D. Which, that's up to you whether you like that or not. Here's a glossary, which thank God this is in here, although I'd have put this at the front. And here's a very thorough tiny print index. It's always good to see this as well. And then here, these are probably the Kickstarter backers. They totally are. And I did not, and here's the character sheet, by the way. I did not back the Kickstarter. I was tempted, and it just wasn't working. The expenditure wasn't working for me at the time. But I'm glad to have a copy of this now. So this is the very handsome book, and something that I don't know if I'm ever going to run it or play it, but it's definitely going to be a nice resource to look through as inspiration for other things. So, but if you are in the market for a quite heavy and detailed, very high fidelity to medieval Europe type of RPG, then Chivalry and Sorcery 5th edition is something you want to look at. Again, the PDF's available pretty much everywhere you can get RPG PDFs nowadays. The hard copy will be available eventually elsewhere, but right now it only appears to be available through Indie Press Revolution. So check all that out. Thanks for watching. Please do like the video if you have enjoyed watching it. Please leave me any comments or questions below, and please check out the Patreon. Until next time, happy gaming.